let me just make it clear for your listeners. There is no such thing as a distinction between Palestinian people and Hamas. Palestinian people are Hamas, right? Over 85% of them voted for Hamas and continue to support Hamas. They are Hamas. They're the ones who brought them to power. Those are the people of Hamas, are drawn from and represent these people. And yet, the whole world is crying and screaming. All of these left-wing godless nations have turned against Israel in support of murderers and rapists. It's a shocking, shocking thing. It's truly, unbelievable. So that really is the fulfillment here. The sin of the Edomites is not that they have physically come and attacked Israel. France and England have not physically attacked Israel, but rather they gaze with glee, as right in verse 12. How could you gaze with glee on your brother that day, on his day of calamity? Right? They celebrated. Think of all the professors, the evil professors in America, the left-wing professors who literally celebrated on October 7th. Right? How could you gloat over the people of Judah on that day of ruin? Right? And Judah, the land of Judea, the tribal land of Judah, is the land where that Hamas invaded from Gaza. Right? So when Judah was invaded and Judah went through this horrific, right, tragedy, you're laughing and you're smiling. You loudly jeer on a day of anguish.
For violence, Hamas, against your brother Jacob, shame shall cover you, and you shall be cut off forever. In the day that you stood on the other side, in the day that strangers carried captive his forces, when foreigners entered his gates and cast lots for Jerusalem, even you were as one of them. Obadiah 1, 10 and 11. In light of the October 7th atrocities, how is Israel living in the fulfillment of these verses in Obadiah right now? Who is Edom? Who is the house of Esau? How do you identify who Edom is today? Obadiah 1:18 goes on to say, the house of Jacob shall be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame, but the house of Esau shall be stubble. They shall kindle them and devour them, and no survivor shall remain of the house of Esau, for the Lord has spoken. How is the house of Jacob being a flame right now? Listen in as Elie Mischel takes us on a deep dive into the book of Obadiah and learn how these ancient prophecies are being fulfilled in our days today. Israel Connect is your bridge to the land and people of Israel. Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Israel Connect. And today I have with me a very special guest, Elie Mischel, and he is the Director of Education with Israel 365. Welcome, Elie.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. So today I wanted to have a conversation with you about the book of Obadiah and how we may be seeing current events unfolding, prophecy being fulfilled before our very eyes. This book talks about a judgment that God brings against Edom because of an ancient hatred and violence that Edom has held against Judah. It also talks about an ancient or historical conflict, but also with a future prophetic conflict between Edom, or the house of Esau, and the house of Jacob. So, Elie, who do you think Edom or the house of Esau is today, and how would you identify them?
So that's the big question. And fortunately, I have spent a lot of time thinking about this. I wrote a book called The War Against the Bible, Ishmael, Esau, and Israel at the End Times. So Esau, of course, is Edom, is Edom, is how we say it in Hebrew. Edom means red, and its name, Esau was red. He was a red. He was a reddish complexion, and there's also the red soup, that he bought off of his brother for the birthright. So when we talk about Edom, the first thing to realize is that we're talking about Esau. But who is Esau today? Who are his descendants, right? And that I think is the key to understanding this very, very short book of Obadiah, right? It's one chapter. It's the shortest book in the Bible, but it packs a lot of punch. So what the sages tell us, right, in Jewish tradition, is that Edom is Rome. Now, what does that mean? Right? Do they mean literally Rome, that his descendants were Romans? Right? That's a little bit hard to believe. The Edomites, were an ancient nation descended from Esau, but they lived to the south of Israel, right? They were not the Romans. So what does that mean? So there are some who will say that Herod, who was the great king of Israel, who was of Edomite ancestry, and he became sort of like a vassal king for the Roman Empire. So they'll explain that that's sort of the connection there, that Herod the Idumean, right, who was from Edom, was connected to Rome. But I think what the rabbis are saying here is something much more profound. They're not simply talking about a tangential connection. They're saying something really, really important. See, we have to understand who Esau was, right? And Esau is very different than Ishmael, right? Um, Esau is when he sells his birthright to his brother for a bowl of soup. I think we've all kind of wondered about that, right? Was Esau stupid, right? What was he doing? For a bowl of soup, you're going to give up your birthright and all that that means spiritually. So we have to understand what's happening there. He says in Hebrew, "Anochi holech lamut," that I am going to die, right? Literally, it's I am walking towards death. So the deeper way to understand what's happening there is, as the sages explain, why was Jacob making this bowl of soup? Why did he cook this bowl of lentil soup? Because that was the traditional mourner's food. Their grandfather Abraham had just died, and Jacob made the soup for his father Isaac, who was a mourner, right? A child of someone who dies is considered a mourner, and so he was making that soup for his father. Now Esau, when his grandfather died, went through a spiritual upheaval, right? He had a crisis, and the sages say that he thought to himself that if even this great man, Abraham, the greatest man to ever live, if even he could die, then clearly there is no God, there's no purpose, there's no meaning to this world. And so he says, I am walking towards death, meaning not just that I'm so hungry that I'm going to die, but rather I'm going towards death, meaning I'm mortal, I'm going to die, and there's nothing after I die. Right? There is no judge, there is no judgment, there is no heaven, there is no nothing. There's no God, there's no creator. This is Esau is having a very terrible spiritual crisis, and he ends up as someone who completely rejects God. Right? That's what's happening here. And then he's happy to give over his birthright to Jacob, because what's the meaning of a birthright if there is no God? All of it's a sham. So that's who Esau was, right? And when you reject God, then your whole life is about pleasure, and it's fundamentally depressing. But it's all about materialism and pleasure, and that's where Esau went, right? He went in that direction, murdering people, taking other people's wives, and he lived that kind of godless life. So when the sages tell us that Rome is Edom, that Rome is Esau, it's not a physical, biological connection. What they're saying is pagan Rome, the Rome that destroyed the Second Temple in Jerusalem in the year 70, right? That Rome was an Edomite type of a nation, right? The Romans then, right? The general Titus, who later became the Emperor Titus, who's the one who destroyed the Second Temple in Jerusalem. He said, "I've destroyed their temple and I've killed their God. I am now God." Right? This was Titus, right? This was pagan, right? He felt that he was himself a god, and that is very much an Esau Edomite quality. Okay, so I know there's a whole lot of history here, and you want to know who is Edom in the book of Obadiah, but I think this can help us understand what we're talking about here. Right? Are we talking now about descendants of the Romans? Nobody knows who the descendants of the Romans are exactly. But I think what we're saying is that we're looking at a modern version of Edom, a modern version of Esau, a modern version of the Romans, meaning people who reject God, people who reject God and biblical values and all that we stand for. That is Edom, right? That's certainly not Ishmael, right? Today, the descendants of Ishmael, the Muslims, many of whom are attacking Israel and seeking to destroy the West, right? They themselves they trace their lineage, or certainly their spiritual lineage, to Ishmael. They believe in God, right? They don't believe in the Bible, but they do believe in God. So They are different than the Edomites. So who are the Edomites of today? Right? They're not the Muslims. Rather, I believe they are those in the West who reject God. They are the godless nations of the world. Now, that's getting more concrete. So who are we talking about? Right. So let's put America aside for a moment. But if you look at much of Europe and how God has been completely rejected, how every church is empty, right? And you see where places like France and Germany and now England have gone, right? I believe that we are looking at Edom, right? That is the West that we, right? These are the people who follow in the pathway of Edom. Now, what about America? Is America Edom? I would like not to think so, but I think it really depends on the choices that America makes. We're not talking here biologically. We are talking, people can choose to be Edomites and they could choose not to be. They could choose to be righteous nations or they could choose to be nations of Edom. So America, right, is I think caught in this battle, this internal battle, whether America will go in the path of Edom. Well, we've seen over the last few months some encouraging signs that Americans, do not want to reject God, right? And we're seeing some pretty godly people come back into government. People like Mike Huckabee, right, who's going to, God willing, will be the ambassador to Israel, right? That's Mike Huckabee is not an Edomite ambassador, right? He's certainly not. So, but the battle for America's soul is certainly continuing, right? No one election will determine that. And so whether America joins the ranks of Edom is up to America, right? And I believe in general, that's how we need to look at prophecy.
Mhm.
I think all too often we make a mistake and we look at prophecy as if we're, some sort of like Chinese fortune teller or something like, this is all fait accompli. It's absolutely not. You'll find many different kinds of prophecies in the prophets that seem to contradict each other, and they really do. Why? Because we're being told that there are a few different possibilities for how the future will play out, and what will determine that? We will determine that, right? We know with certainty God has promised that redemption will come, but will it come through great pain? Or will it come more easily? Will it take a long time? Will it come more quickly? All of that depends upon us. That's our free will. And so I think the same thing is true here. Who qualifies as Edom, right? It's the godless West, right? And who is part of the godless West? Well, that's up to us to determine. I think sadly there are many nations that are already in that Edomite camp. And so that if you take this approach, and certainly you could argue with me, but this is my understanding based upon the sources that I've read and my own Bible study, then I think it opens up the book of Obadiah in a truly profound way. Because now we're not talking some hazy prophecy. Now we're talking about a real situation in our own current in our world today, right? We know these countries. We're allied with these countries. Where these many of these countries have turned their backs on Israel, unsurprisingly, and that is something that is developed here in the one chapter of Obadiah.
Right. Thank you. That was amazing. One thing that you said that really sparks with me is you gave us the criteria. How do we identify who Edom is today? And I heard you say it's those individuals or groups or entities that hate the God of Israel. And so as I think about that, in my mind, the people that I see who hate Israel, who proclaim a hatred against Israel and against the Jewish people, is radical Islam, the extremists, Hamas, Hezbollah, but also the woke left liberals that go to those demonstrations that are pro-Hamas people. And, it's each individual. Where do they stand with Israel? If they have a deep love for Israel and the Jewish people, and they align themselves with the God of Israel, I think that they're aligning themselves with the tents of Jacob. But if they, hate Israel and the Jewish people, they're aligning themselves with the tents of Esau. So I'm going to share my screen now, and we're going to dive into Obadiah. And I want to look at verses 10 and 11. So let me just share my screen and bring that up for you. Verses 10 and 11, and especially as we read this in light of October 7th, 2023, and the carnage and the massacre that happened and the hostages that were then taken. And, there's still, many of them still there in Gaza today. In light of those events that happened on the ground. Let's look at verses 10 and 11. And then I'll have you comment. For the outrage to your brother Jacob, disgrace shall engulf you, and you shall perish forever. On that day when you stood aloof, when aliens carried off his goods, when foreigners entered his gates and cast lots for Jerusalem, you were as one of them. That's from the Israel Bible. Now, here's the same passage, and this is in the New King James. For violence against your brother Jacob, shame shall cover you, and you shall be cut off forever. Verse 11, in the day that you stood on the other side, in the day that strangers carried captive his forces, when foreigners entered his gates and cast lots for Jerusalem, even you were as one of them. So I'd love to hear your comments and your thoughts on these verses.
So these verses are incredibly powerful, and we are living them today. I'll just make clear again. I believe that this chapter is not about the radical Islamists who are Ishmael, but rather about the, like you said, the woke anti-God people who have allied themselves together with the people of Ishmael, right? And so, meaning we have other prophecies that speak of them. Like, but if you look, for example, in Psalm 83 verse 7, it talks there about the tents of Edom and the Ishmaelites. They join together, they take counsel with one accord. Against you, they form a pact. So we see today, it's the people of Ishmael are the ones who are physically attacking the state of Israel. But what about the Edomites? What about these Western countries that have turned their backs upon the people of Israel and joined up in support of Hamas? I mean, think about the Macron, the leader of France, and how sickening, the words that he has used, attacking Israel, condemning Israel for, of all things, killing Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, who's responsible for the death of hundreds of Americans, and yet he's taking their side, right? These kinds of spineless people. Think about the Starmer, the left-wing government in England today, in Great Britain. What a disaster! And all of these countries now refuse to sell arms to Israel. What they're doing, right, is 100% a fulfillment of these verses. Because on that day, when you stood aloof, right, you stood apart, right, as these aliens, right, these foreigners came into our land, meaning as Hamas came in and took our hostages, you watched from afar and did nothing, right? And you were as one of them. You were as one of them, right? There's a profound principle here, right? This is something that we talk about a lot with the Holocaust, that if you're a bystander and watch, with indifference, and then you're not concerned to take the side of the women and children who were raped and murdered, but rather, you're going to take an even-handed approach, or even, God forbid, go to the other side, right? And support the poor Palestinian people. Let me just make it clear for your listeners. There is no such thing as a distinction between Palestinian people and Hamas. Palestinian people are Hamas, right? Over 85% of them voted for Hamas and continue to support Hamas. They are Hamas. They're the ones who brought them to power. Those are the people of Hamas, are drawn from and represent these people. And yet, the whole world is crying and screaming. All of these left-wing godless nations have turned against Israel in support of murderers and rapists. It's a shocking, shocking thing. It's truly, unbelievable. So that really is the fulfillment here. The sin of the Edomites is not that they have physically come and attacked Israel. France and England have not physically attacked Israel, but rather they gaze with glee, as right in verse 12. How could you gaze with glee on your brother that day, on his day of calamity? Right? They celebrated. Think of all the professors, the evil professors in America, the left-wing professors who literally celebrated on October 7th. Right? How could you gloat over the people of Judah on that day of ruin? Right? And Judah, the land of Judea, the tribal land of Judah, is the land where that Hamas invaded from Gaza. Right? So when Judah was invaded and Judah went through this horrific, right, tragedy, you're laughing and you're smiling. You loudly jeer on a day of anguish. And so it's hard to find more appropriate verses for what we've gone through right now. I think it's describing, literally our time. And you pointed out, I believe in your translation there, the word Hamas. The word Hamas in Hebrew means violence. And in many of these prophecies, here in Obadiah and also in the book of Joel, it talks about, the Hamas that is perpetrated against the people of Israel. I mean, literally, these words are used in prophecies that are thousands of years old. It's impossible not to see what we're living through right now.
Wow. So I'm going to share my screen again and look at verses 17 and 18. So just give me a moment here. Okay, verses 17 and 18 from Obadiah. But on Zion's mount, a remnant shall survive, and it shall be holy. The house of Jacob shall dispossess those who dispossess them. Continuing on in verse 18, the house of Jacob shall be fire, and the house of Joseph flame, and the house of Esau shall be straw. They shall burn it and devour it, and no survivor shall be left of the house of Esau, for Hashem has spoken. And so I wanted to get your thoughts on those verses that we just looked at. What are your comments or thoughts? Who are these saviors of Mount Zion? In this other translation, verses 17 and 18, it says, but on Mount Zion there shall be deliverance and there shall be holiness. The house of Jacob shall possess their possession. So who are these deliverers? And who are the deliverers? And how do you suppose that the house of Jacob shall and the house of Joseph be aflame to burn up the stubble of Esau? How do you think that's going to play out?
So this is a great question. These are verses that are really open to interpretation. Hard to know exactly what they mean. The remnant, this house of Jacob. Jacob is used a lot here in both of these verses, as opposed to Israel, and that there's a distinction there between these two names that are used for the people of Israel. The name Jacob generally refers to, uh, the weaker side of the people of Israel, Israel in exile. Jacob was always running away from everyone, running away from Esau, running away from Laban, right? That was Esau. And it's only when he begins to fight back, right? He fights the angel of Esau that he becomes Israel, that was one who struggles and battles. So I think that what we're seeing here, there's great significance in these names. The house of Jacob shall be fire, and the house of Joseph a flame. Meaning there's always a fire burning, even during the very difficult and painful times when the people of Israel are on the retreat. Right? October 7th was a Jacob moment, right? To a great degree, right? We were running, we were terrified, we were afraid. But there's a fire in the house of Jacob, right? The house of Jacob, even when we're in our weak moments, we have this burning fire within us. We keep that fire going. That's something that we saw on October 7th. Alongside of all the horror, we saw tremendous heroism and strength and courage, right? And a refusal to simply give up, right? And so that is the fire of Jacob. But what is Joseph? Joseph is when that fire becomes a flame. Joseph represents the people of Israel coming in strength to the land, right? Who is the leader who brought us into the land? It was Joshua, the descendant of Ephraim and Joseph, right? Joseph is understood to be the physical strength of the people of Israel when we break out of our exile type of mentality and our weakness and our fear, and we rebound and we become like Joseph, right? Joseph, who's unafraid to go out into the world, right? Think about it. He was one young man sold as a slave down to Egypt. Within a couple of years, he's basically the ruler of all of Egypt, right? This is a man who's not afraid of the odds against him, who goes down and he becomes this, with great power and strength, right? And Joshua comes and physically conquers the land. So what's going to happen, I believe, we're being told here by the prophet that there will be this dark moment of Jacob, but the flame will not go out. The flame will not go out even during these dark moments, like the moments that we see, like on October 7th. And we've had many such moments even in the land of Israel. But what will happen is that we'll recover through the strength of Mount Zion, because we are rooted in the Temple Mount, right? We are rooted in this land in the God of Israel, right? Our strength, think about all of the thousands, the hundreds of thousands who come every day to pray at the Western Wall, right? The strength, that's the fire of Jacob, will then turn into the flame, the great flame of Joseph who will wipe out the enemies of Israel. And so this is not a process that happens overnight, but this is what we're seeing. We're not getting more and more exhausted and beaten down as this war goes on. And this is a very hard war. Just for your listeners to understand, I mean, there have been people, young men who are at the front for over a year now who've come home for a week here, a week there. I mean, my niece who got married a few days before October 7th, yeah, her husband is an elite soldier. She almost never seen her husband since she's been married, and it's been it's almost been a year and a half, and she spent a total of what, 3 weeks with her husband. That's not a simple thing, and it doesn't seem like there's an easy end in sight. And yet, instead of becoming exhausted and beaten down, we're finding that the people of Israel are gathering strength more and more and more with each passing week and month, right? Our enemies are shuddering. They're terrified. We talked about this before the call. What's happening across the Middle East. I mean, it's the Middle East is trembling at the might of tiny Israel. Tiny, tiny Israel, somehow the might of Israel, because of course it's not just Israel, it's the God of Israel. And so this little fire of Jacob is turning into the flame of Joseph.
Yes. So this is just one little aside I'll add to what you just shared. I would hope that perhaps that the evangelical Christians who are Christian Zionists, who closely align themselves with the God of Israel and with the people of Israel, and who have a deep love for the land and the people of Israel, that perhaps we would be counted among the house of Joseph, that we stand with you in spirit and in support and in prayer and in every way that we can. That I want to be in that tent, in the tent of Joseph with you. So that's
Well,
my heart. I think a lot
I
of
would give a
Christians,
very, I'll give you a different biblical example that I think really does prove that point, very clearly. When King David, was running from his own son, Absalom, right? Or Avshalom in Hebrew. When he was running from his own son, his whole life is falling apart around him. There were some people who stayed true to David during that very dark moment. And who are those people? At the very front, at the very, the front of that line, and the most important one who receives an enormous amount of attention is a man called Ittai Hagiti, Ittai the Gittite, who was not a Jew, not a Jew. He was, and yet he became, in the ensuing war, he's one of the great generals that leads David's army to victory and recaptures the kingdom of Israel. And he really is the epitome, I believe, of the holy Gentile who stands with the people of Israel in their darkest moments. I believe very much that we are currently reliving parts of the Bible on the way to redemption. And I've written about this, but we are, in a sense, the redemption has different stages. And so the first three kings of Israel represent different stages of redemption: Saul and David and Solomon. Saul is the beginning, the physical building up of the land, and I think we're past that. The people of Israel have moved beyond the secular Zionism, so to speak, of Saul. But we're not yet at the time of Solomon, of the rebuilding of the temple. We're not at the final time of peace. Where are we? We're in between. We are currently reliving the life of David as a nation. Right? As a people, we are reliving David's experiences, the ups and downs, the battles that he had to fight on the way to redemption. And we find repeatedly in David's life that there are holy non-Jews who get him through very difficult moments. When David is uncertain, does Jerusalem really belong to me? Can I conquer it? Can I hold it? Right? Hiram, the holy king of Tyre, right? He comes and he tells David, not only is Jerusalem yours, I'm going to build you a palace in Jerusalem. Right? And later, Hiram joins David's son Solomon, and together they build the temple. And you heard that correctly. The temple was not built by Solomon. The temple was built in a partnership of Solomon and Hiram, the king of Tyre, right? The non-Jewish king, who together in partnership with the people of Israel were able to build God's house in Jerusalem. So from Ittai the Gittite to Hiram, the king of Tyre, right? David's life, and therefore I believe our life, our generation, this generation of war, that we find ourselves in. We're in a war all across the world, and what in several different ways. It's only by joining together in these kinds of friendships that we can defeat our enemies and fulfill God's will. And so, that's true here in Israel. It's true in America. It's true across the world.
Wow. The last passage I want to look at with you, I think it's connected to what we just read in Obadiah. And there's often we see lots of connections from one book to another book. This passage is from Zechariah chapter 12. I'm going to just read the verses 1 through 6, and then have you comment. So in Zechariah chapter 12, starting in verse 1, it says, "The burden of the word of the Lord for Israel, says the Lord, which stretched forth the heavens and lays the foundation of the earth and forms the spirit of man within him. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling to all the people round about, when they shall be in the siege, both against Judah and against Jerusalem. And in that day will I make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people. All that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces, though all the people of the earth be gathered together against it. In that day, says the Lord, I will smite every horse with astonishment and his rider with madness, and I will open my eyes upon the house of Judah and will smite every horse of the people with blindness." Now here's the real verses I really wanted to get to, verses 5 and 6. "And the governors of Judah shall say in their heart, the inhabitants of Jerusalem shall be my strength in the Lord of hosts their God. In that day will I make the governors of Judah like a hearth of fire among the wood, and like a torch of fire in a sheath. And they shall devour all the people round about it, on the right hand and on the left. And Jerusalem shall be inhabited again in her own place, even in Jerusalem." So here we have this image, this picture of a torch of fire that's going to burn up the chaff, the sheaves. And we have these actors called the governors of Judah. So who do you suppose these governors of Judah are? And how's that going to play out? How might that look? What do you think?
So I think we have to go back to the earlier verses and, a couple of verses before where it talks about all of these nations will act against Jerusalem, right? And we see this all the time now. It's unbelievable. These things you don't even notice them anymore, but the UN is constantly passing. This was just a few months ago. They passed resolutions saying that Jerusalem, belongs to the Palestinians, does not belong to Israel. They've been fighting for Jerusalem for thousands of years. And what happens, right? We're told that I will make Jerusalem a stone of burden for all peoples. Now, what does that mean? A stone of burden for all peoples. It means they try to lift up this stone. That's the parable. And what happens if they lift up a stone that's too heavy for them? It comes crashing down on their head. Right? There's no other nation can take Jerusalem without it coming ultimately to bite them from behind and have the stone come crashing down on their head. And we're told, at the end of the book of Joel, that all these nations will try to take Jerusalem away from the people of Israel to divide God's land, right? So this is what they're all going to try to take Jerusalem. And this is what Hamas was trying to do in this war. They called this war, right? Hamas called this war the Al-Aqsa flood. Al-Aqsa is their mosque that's on the Temple Mount. Meaning for them, this whole battle is not about Gaza or about the Jewish communities on the border. They want Jerusalem. But every nation that tries to take Jerusalem, it will come crashing down upon their heads. And we see that what's happening with Hamas, right? They're a shell of what they used to be, right? They're still fighting and they're very tough, but they're a small remnant of what they were, and we're picking them off one by one and slowly destroying them. So that's the background. Now to your question, right? What is happening here with the princes of Judah, right? It seems to be a negative statement about the princes of Judah, right? That on that day, right, when these enemies are punished for trying to conquer Jerusalem, on that day, the princes of Judah will be like a fiery stove among wood and a brand of fire among sheaves, and there's something negative that's happening here. It seems, right? So they're going to be burned up to a degree. So there are many different explanations for what this means. Some more negative, some more positive. Um, the one view from Rabbi Abraham ibn Ezra. He was a medieval commentator who lived in Spain. He says that this refers to the self-hating Jews who had joined with our enemies. Do you know any of those people, Laura? Right? I
Yeah,
think
some
we
of
all
the
do.
liberal
All you
ones
got to
in the
do is
liberal.
go on TV, and watch look at the Jewish actors
Yes.
and left-wing crazies, right, who have turned their backs on the people of Israel and joined in with the enemies of Israel, right? And what's going to happen? They will have an epiphany, an awakening, when they see that no enemy can take Jerusalem from us, right? Or even if it's not, our self-hating Jews, our enemies, but even simply non-believing Jews, Jews who know so little about their heritage. And sadly, most American Jews fall into that bucket, right? And what will happen when they see how, this incredible story of Jerusalem, where the nations try to take it, but they cannot succeed, right? They themselves will awaken and return to belief in God. And I like that particular interpretation because we're seeing that coming true before our eyes, right? There's a great awakening, which your listeners may not know this, depending on where they live, if they know Jewish people or not. But there are thousands of Jews all across America who are awakening and returning to God and to Judaism, right? To belief in the Bible. That's happening now in the wake of October 7th and Israel's unbelievable victories, one after the other. I mean, you see there are many Jewish celebrities that all of a sudden have rediscovered, their Jewishness and their pride and their belief in God. All of this is happening. Sheryl Sandberg, you remember her? She was like the one of the leading figures in Facebook for many years. Very famous woman, major businesswoman. I mean, she has said, "I now identify fully, right, as my primary identity as a Jew, as part of God's people." Right, and this is happening all over the place. Sid Rosenberg, who is a little bit of a crass radio jockey, the number one radio jockey in New York City, right? He's a right-wing radio jockey. He's friends with Trump, but was definitely not a religious person. And now all he does is talk about Israel and being a Jew and what that means to him, right? These are just famous examples. Josh Hammer, who is the editor at large at Newsweek, has become an observant Jew, right? A full-on Bible believing Jew. I mean, these are not small things, given how left-wing and secular American Jewry is overall, that there's such an awakening that's happening is truly, truly incredible. So, I think that, that these verses in Zechariah, these verses in Obadiah, these are not just verses talking about a distant future. We are literally living them right now as we speak.
Truly, we live in amazing times. It's been a real joy and an honor to look into the word with you and to hear your thoughts and your interpretations. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it, and we'll have to do this again soon.
Thank you so much, Laura. And really, I encourage everyone as a parting words, don't be afraid. Come to Israel. Come here, come visit. Yes, there are battles that are happening on the borders and but you wouldn't know it if you're in Israel itself. And the strength that you could give to the people of Israel by showing up now in 2025, right? Make it happen. Like we have trips at Israel 365 that are coming over the coming months. There are many trips that you can join, but come meet the people, talk to the soldiers. These are the heroes who are defending all of us, the whole world. What you could do, what you could accomplish by coming here now this year, you'll make a world of difference and it'll change your life. So that's my parting message. Come be a part of it. See these prophecies in action. See the great awakening that's happening in Israel, right? The thousands and thousands of soldiers who are praying to God, but who never did so before, but who are now praying to God before they go into battle, who are returning to God. It's unbelievable what's happening here. So join us here. Come, we'll have a hot drink together here in the land of Israel. We're waiting you, and God willing, we'll be able to go up to a rebuilt temple soon together. All of us, Jews and Christians, together in prayer and in love and in harmony.